A mind that clings. Why we struggle to let go. There's a man I once knew. On paper, he had everything. A successful career, a house with a view, a family that loved him, and enough money to never worry again. But every night, as the world went quiet, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest. It wasn't pain, exactly. It wasn't even fear. It was something harder to describe, like carrying a weight you don't remember picking up. One day, he said to me, "I don't understand. I've done everything right. Why do I still feel like something's missing?" I didn't answer him right away, because the answer wasn't in words. It was in silence, in the space between thoughts, in the realization that what we hold on to so tightly is often what keeps us from peace. You see, we live in a culture that teaches us to hold on. Hold on to success. Hold on to youth. Hold on to relationships, identities, beliefs, everything. That gives us a sense of me. We call it love. We call it achievement. But most of the time, it's just fear dressed up in more acceptable clothing. And the Buddha saw this. Long before neuroscience confirmed it, long before therapists gave it a name, he observed a simple, profound truth. The mind clings, and in that clinging, we suffer. This video, and this entire journey, is not about religion. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering what we were before we clung to titles, stories, and outcomes. It's about seeing clearly, maybe for the first time, that peace doesn't come from holding tighter, but from letting go with wisdom. You don't have to retreat to a monastery. You don't have to sell your possessions. But you may need to ask one quiet question: what am I still holding that's holding me back? Let's explore that together. When mine becomes a burden, why we hold on so tightly. He sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was quiet, the lights were low, and yet he couldn't relax. His hands kept reaching for his phone, checking emails, scanning headlines, rereading messages. Not because anything urgent was happening, but because if he stopped, if he really let the stillness in, he'd have to face a deeper discomfort, the weight of everything he was carrying. He had a house, a job title, a family portrait above the fireplace. He had a story, one most people would admire. But somewhere along the way, that story became a prison. The title he worked so hard to earn became something he couldn't let go of, even as it drained him. The possessions he surrounded himself with didn't feel like blessings anymore. They felt like responsibilities, like proof he had to keep defending. And beneath it all, one quiet truth kept whispering, "I'm so tired of holding everything." In the modern world, we are taught to build, to achieve, to collect. We call it success. We call it freedom. But the more we attach our identity to what we own, the more fragile that identity becomes. The job becomes my worth. The relationship becomes my value. The past becomes my story. And anything that threatens what we claim as mine feels like a threat to our very existence. The Buddha saw this pattern clearly. He called it clinging, upadana, not just to material things, but to ideas, images, roles, and beliefs. We think that clinging gives us control, but in truth, it gives us tension. We carry a silent fear that if we loosen our grip, we'll lose everything. That without our possessions, our relationships, or our labels, we'll disappear. But here's the paradox. The tighter we cling, the more anxious we become. The more we define ourselves by what we own, the more unstable we feel inside. It's like carrying a suitcase that grows heavier the longer we hold it, but we're too afraid to set it down, even when our arms begin to tremble. Real letting go doesn't mean abandoning our lives. It means relating to them differently. It means seeing our job as something we do, not something we are. It means loving someone without needing to possess them. It means allowing space between who we are and what we have. And when we allow that space, something surprising happens. We don't become emptier, we become lighter. The burden of mine begins to loosen. And in that softening, we begin to discover a freedom that isn't built on control, but on peace. The body you didn't choose, a lesson in impermanence. You didn't choose this body. You didn't choose its height, its skin tone, its genetics, or the rate at which it would age. You didn't pick your bone structure, your metabolism, or your heartbeat. And yet, how much of your life has been spent judging it, decorating it, fighting it, or trying to control it, as if it were a project you were supposed to perfect? In the mirror, we search for flaws. In the gym, we chase an ideal. In doctors' offices, we negotiate with time. We treat the body like an object to conquer, a possession to polish, or a battlefield to win. But underneath all that effort, there's a quiet truth we rarely face. This body is not a fixed thing. It's not permanent. It's not even stable. It's changing all the time in ways we cannot see and cannot stop. Cells die and regenerate. Muscles weaken, skin loosens, organs tire. One day we can run without effort. The next, we ache climbing stairs. And no matter how tightly we hold on, through skincare, supplements, surgery, nothing can stop this tide. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are impermanent, including the body. But this isn't meant to depress us. It's meant to liberate us. Because once we stop demanding that the body stay young, or strong, or perfect, we begin to relate to it with more tenderness. We stop seeing it as a burden or a brand. We start seeing it as a companion, one that's been carrying us through joy and sorrow, failure and triumph, without asking for thanks. Sometimes, spiritual seekers try to detach from the body completely, as if denying it is a shortcut to enlightenment. But the Buddha never taught rejection. He taught awareness. And awareness starts by realizing that this body, while not ours in the way we imagine, is still worthy of care. Not because it defines us, but because it enables us to wake up. It lets us breathe, walk, meditate, hold someone we love. It gives us the rare and precious opportunity to be alive, to be here, now. In a world obsessed with appearance and youth, seeing the body through the lens of impermanence is a quiet revolution. It's not a surrender, it's a softening. It's the moment we stop punishing the body for changing and start honoring it for staying with us this long. And when the time comes, as it always does, for the body to fail and fall away, we'll meet. That moment not with fear, but with reverence. Because we'll know it was never truly ours, but it was always enough. Thoughts, memories, and me. Are you really in control? You sit down, close your eyes, and tell yourself, I will be still. I will be present. For a few moments, there's quiet. Then a voice appears, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp. Did you send that email? What if they misunderstood? Why did she say that to me? And just like that, you're no longer here. You're in a conversation that happened 3 years ago. You're in a future that hasn't come yet. You're inside a mind that acts more like a wild animal than a loyal friend. We tend to believe our thoughts belong to us, that we're the authors of every word that runs through our heads. But when we stop and really watch, it becomes clear most of these thoughts don't ask for permission. They arise on their own, at their own time, with their own energy. They are triggered by smells, by memories, by a single word on a screen. One thought becomes five become a spiral, and suddenly we're anxious or angry or overwhelmed, and we don't even know why. The Buddha didn't ask us to silence our thoughts. He asked us to observe them. He compared the mind to a monkey, leaping from branch to branch, restless and never still. But unlike the monkey, we believe our thoughts define us. We cling to them. This is my idea. This is my truth. This is who I am. But who are you really beneath all that noise? Consider this. Your thoughts yesterday were different from your thoughts today. The beliefs you held 10 years ago may be the ones you question now. Even your memories are unstable. They reshape themselves over time, colored by emotion, rewritten by context. If your inner world is constantly changing, what exactly are you holding on to? In modern psychology, this is sometimes called cognitive fusion, the belief that we are our thoughts. But Buddhism offers something far more liberating. It reminds us that thoughts are not the problem. Attachment to them is. You don't have to fight your mind. You just have to stop believing every word it says. You don't have to drown in the river. You can sit on the bank and watch it flow. This shift in perspective changes everything. When a painful memory arises, you can recognize it as a visitor, not a definition. When fear shows up, you can meet it with breath instead of panic. When joy appears, you can enjoy it fully, knowing it too will pass. This is not detachment in the cold sense of the word. It's warmth without stickiness. It's presence without clinging. It's the ability to be with your mind without being lost in it. And slowly, something remarkable happens. The space between thoughts grows wider. Silence becomes less threatening. You no longer need to control every thought because you no longer believe they control you. You begin to realize the mind is not you. It's a landscape you can walk through gently with awareness. Wired to cling, the neuroscience of attachment. We like to think of attachment as a choice, that we cling to things, people, identities, beliefs, because they matter deeply to us. But what if it goes deeper than that? What if clinging isn't just psychological, but biological, wired into the very fabric of how our brains are built? Modern neuroscience reveals something striking. The same systems that help us survive also cause us to suffer. When we feel ownership over something, a person, a place, even an idea, the brain rewards us. It releases dopamine, the feel-good chemical, giving us a sense of pleasure, safety, and control. It's no wonder we get attached. The moment we buy a new phone, find a partner, or gain recognition, our brain lights up. It says, yes, this is mine. This means something. Hold on to it. But that same mechanism becomes a trap. Because once we have it, we fear losing it. And the brain, so eager to reward, is just as quick to punish. The absence of what we cling to activates stress, anxiety, even grief, not because we've lost something essential, but because the mind believes it was part of us. The Buddha didn't use the language of neuroscience, but he understood this cycle intuitively. He taught that craving, ta, leads to suffering, dukkha, and that this craving is rooted in ignorance, not just of the world, but of how our own minds work. We think clinging is love. We think control is strength. But in reality, much of what we're clinging to has more to do with chemicals than with truth. This doesn't mean we're broken. It means we're human. Our ancestors needed this wiring. It kept them bonded to family, alert to danger, motivated to protect what was theirs. But in the modern world, where threats are abstract and attachments are often mental, this same wiring can backfire. We cling to social status, to opinions, to curated versions of ourselves online. We cling to being right. We cling to being seen. And when those attachments are threatened, we don't just feel discomfort, we feel panic. Because somewhere deep inside, our nervous system is still whispering, if you lose this, you won't be safe. The good news is that awareness rewires the brain. Mindfulness practices have been shown to reduce the intensity of emotional reactions by calming the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Loving kindness. Meditation increases activity in the parts of the brain responsible for empathy and compassion. And acts of generosity, what the Buddha called dana, break the grip of possession by retraining the mind to find joy in giving, not owning. So no, you didn't choose to be wired this way, but you can choose what you do with that wiring. You can notice the grasping as it arises, feel the surge of wanting, and breathe through it instead of obeying it. You can replace mine with here. And must have, with this too will pass. Bit by bit, the brain changes. The heart softens. And what once felt like a reflex to possess becomes a new kind of strength. The courage to let go, even when everything inside you is telling you to hold on. From CEO to sand, the truth you can't take with you. He was the kind of man who turned heads when he walked into a room. Sharp suit, firm handshake, a schedule booked months in advance. He had built an empire, teams beneath him, titles before his name, awards on his wall. People listened when he spoke. His name carried weight. But when I met him, none of that seemed to matter. He was sitting on a hospital bed, the light in his eyes dimmed by exhaustion. And with a half smile, he said, "All of this, I can't take any of it with me, can I?" That moment wasn't sad. It was honest. For perhaps the first time in his life, he saw things clearly. Not as possessions, but as passing. And that clarity was the beginning of peace. We spend our lives climbing, collecting, achieving, building identities that feel solid and secure. We tell ourselves, this is who I am. This is what I've earned. But none of it lasts. The job title, the recognition, the applause, they fade faster than we expect. And the more we invest our worth in what we can accumulate, the more fragile our peace becomes. Because deep down, we know the truth. We can't take any of it with us. There's an old story about a king who asked a sage, "What's the one truth that applies to all people, in all situations, at all times?" The sage replied, "This too shall pass." It's a phrase we often hear in hard times, but rarely apply to our triumphs. Yet the truth cuts both ways. The fortune we built, the home we decorated, the admiration we receive, they, too, shall pass. The Buddha saw through the illusion of permanence. He taught that clinging to what is temporary guarantees suffering, not because success is wrong, but because mistaking it for something we can keep is where pain begins. He urged us to live with awareness that everything we have is borrowed, from the body we wake up in to the breath that sustains us. And with that awareness comes something unexpected, gratitude. Because when we stop trying to make things last forever, we start appreciating them for what they are. Gifts, not guarantees. We enjoy without gripping. We build without believing the structure will stand forever. And in doing so, we become lighter, freer, more present. In the end, the man in the hospital didn't talk about his business empire. He talked about the scent of his wife's hair when they danced, the feel of grass under his feet as a boy, the laughter of his children echoing down the hall. He didn't regret what he couldn't take with him. He cherished what he got to experience while he could. From CEO to sand, this is not a fall. It's a return to what's real, a return to what matters. And in that return, we find the one thing we truly get to keep: awareness. The monkey in the jar, what we refuse to release. In a quiet village, far from cities and noise, children used to trap monkeys using a simple trick. They'd place a small jar outside, narrow at the neck, with fruit or nuts inside. The monkey, curious and eager, would reach in, wrap its fist around the prize, and find that it couldn't pull its hand back out. The opening was too small for a clenched fist to escape, and yet, the monkey wouldn't let go. It would scream, thrash, panic. But release the fruit? Never. Even though the trap was never truly locked, it was the monkey's own grip that kept it stuck. We hear this story and smile at the foolishness of the monkey. But how different are we, really? How many times have we clung to something, an argument, a relationship, a belief that we knew was hurting us, just because the thought of letting go felt scarier than the pain of holding on? It might be the idea of who we think we're supposed to be, or the version of success we inherited from someone else. It could be a grudge we've nursed for years, or a future we imagined so vividly that we can't bear to see it slip away. Whatever it is, we hold it tightly, not because it brings us peace, but because letting go would mean admitting we're no longer in control. But here's the irony: we never were. Control is the illusion, and clinging is our reaction to that illusion falling apart. The Buddha understood this long before psychologists gave it a name. He taught that we suffer not because of what happens to us, but because of how we hold what happens. Our refusal to release creates tension in the body, restlessness in the mind, and heaviness in the heart. We don't realize how much effort it takes to keep clenching until the moment we let go, and suddenly feel the quiet relief that comes with an open hand. Letting go doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've finally recognized that holding on is costing you more than it's giving you. It means choosing freedom over control, peace over possession, and trust over fear. So the question isn't whether you've been trapped. The question is, what are you holding that's holding you back? Possessive love isn't love. It's fear in disguise. At first, it feels like love. The way your heart tightens when they're away. The way you worry when they don't respond. The way you want to protect them, hold them close, never let them go. We tell ourselves it's devotion. We say, I just care too much. But if we look closely, honestly, we'll see something else underneath. Not tenderness, not connection, but fear. We fear losing what we've come to see as ours. We fear not being needed, not being chosen, not being enough. And so love slowly turns into possession. We begin to watch too closely, expect too much, demand without saying we're demanding. We confuse attachment for intimacy and control for care. But love that clings is not love. It's fear dressed in the language of devotion. The Buddha understood this confusion deeply. He saw how craving slips quietly into our closest relationships, not just with people, but with roles and identities. We cling to our partners, our children, our friends, not because we're bad or selfish, but because we believe that without them, we're not whole. And that illusion makes us suffer. Because the tighter we hold, the more fragile the bond becomes. What once felt like connection starts to feel like a cage, for them and for us. Possessive love whispers, stay close so I don't feel alone. But true love says, you are free, and I am still whole. One is based on fear of loss. The other is rooted in trust. Not just in the other person, but in ourselves. That we are enough, even without being clung to. That we can care deeply without trying to own. That we can stay open even when nothing is guaranteed. In the stillness of meditation, you can observe this shift. You'll notice how thoughts arise. I hope they don't leave. Why didn't they call? And how quickly those thoughts become stories, demands, silent expectations. But if you breathe through them, soften your grip, you'll feel something else appear, space. And in that space, love transforms. It stops being about security and starts being about presence. It becomes less about what you get and more about what you give freely, without needing anything in return. Loving without clinging is not easy. It requires strength, clarity, and courage. But it is the only kind of love that doesn't break under pressure. It is the only kind that grows over time, instead of collapsing under the weight of expectation. And it's the only kind of love that leaves both people free and still deeply connected. I am what I own. The trap of identity and ego. When someone asks, "Who are you?" we rarely pause. We answer with our name, our job, where we live, what we've achieved. I'm a lawyer. I'm a mother. I'm successful. I'm struggling. Without even realizing it, we speak in labels, roles we've gathered, stories we've told, things we believe define us. But beneath all of it, who are we really? If the job disappears, if the title fades, if the relationships change, does the self disappear with them? We live in a culture that teaches us to build an identity, not just through effort, but through ownership. The car we drive, the clothes we wear, the apps we use, even the opinions we defend. These things become extensions of me. We curate a life that looks a certain way, not because we're vain, but because somewhere deep inside, we believe that who we are is only as solid as what we can show. And when something threatens that, when a belief is challenged, when a role is lost, when an image cracks, we don't just feel discomfort. We feel like we're falling apart. The Buddha saw this long before social media gave us digital mirrors. He taught that the idea of a fixed, permanent self is an illusion. That what we call I is just a bundle of processes, thoughts, sensations, memories, desires, constantly shifting, constantly reacting. And yet, we cling. We build walls around a self-image and then trap ourselves inside it. A man achieves success and then refuses to show weakness, even when he's drowning. A woman becomes the strong one in the family and can't ask for help, even when she's exhausted. We don't live freely. We live defensively, guarding an identity we think we have to protect. But what if the self isn't something we have to defend? What if it's something we can loosen? What if who you are isn't fixed at all, but fluid, something that can grow, adapt, soften, and evolve? Modern psychology now echoes what Buddhism has long taught, that a rigid self-concept creates suffering. When we over-identify with our roles, our beliefs, or our past, we leave no room for change. We become stuck in a version of ourselves that may no longer serve us. But the truth is, we are not our thoughts. We are not our stories. We are not the things we own or the titles we carry. We are the awareness behind it all, the quiet space that sees, feels, and knows without needing to prove. Letting go of ego doesn't mean losing yourself. It means returning to something deeper than identity, something more real than any label. It means no longer needing to be right all the time, or admired, or praised, or invincible. It means being human. And when we allow that, when we release the grip of I am this, we make space for something far greater to emerge: freedom. The backpack full of stones. How we carry what we don't need. Imagine walking through a quiet forest trail. The trees are tall, the air is crisp, and the path winds gently beneath your feet. But on your back is a heavy backpack. At first, you barely notice it. You've carried it for so long it feels like part of you. But as the road steepens and the hours pass, the weight becomes undeniable. Your shoulders ache, your breath shortens, and eventually, the beauty around you fades into the background. You're no longer walking to enjoy the journey. You're walking just to endure it. That backpack is what we all carry. Not of camping gear or tools, but of emotional weight. Regret from the past. Expectations we never chose. Guilt that no longer belongs to us. Old stories about who we should be. We fill the bag with judgments, identities, unresolved fears, and silent what-ifs. Then we carry it everywhere. Into our relationships, our decisions, our dreams, believing that if we just push through, it'll all be worth it. But we rarely ask, why am I still carrying this? The Buddha spoke of this weight not as punishment, but as misunderstanding. We mistake our pain for responsibility. We think letting go means betrayal, or failure, or weakness. But letting go is not abandoning what matters. It's setting down what no longer serves. It's recognizing that not everything we've picked up along the way needs to come with us into the next moment. Modern therapy echoes this truth. Studies show that rumination, the act of mentally replaying painful events, correlates strongly with anxiety and depression. But when we practice awareness, when we simply pause and observe the contents of our backpack, we begin to see what's essential and what's just habit. And often, the heaviest things we carry were never ours to begin with. This is the quiet wisdom of Buddhist practice: to notice the weight without judgment and to release it without drama. It doesn't require a grand gesture. Sometimes, it's as simple as a breath. as powerful as saying, "I don't need this anymore." With each release, we walk a little lighter. Not because life becomes easier, but because we're no longer dragging the past through every step of the present. Eventually, we realize the forest was always beautiful. It's just that we were too burdened to see it. Giving without losing. The transformative power of letting go. There's a quiet strength in those who give without needing to be seen. A parent who wakes early to pack lunch for their child. A friend who listens without interrupting. A stranger who offers a smile to someone lost in thought. These acts go unnoticed by the world, but they leave ripples, not because of what was given, but because of how it was given, freely, without grasping, without expectation. We often think of giving as a transaction. Something is lost, something is gained. We measure it, time, money, energy, and we ask ourselves, can I afford to give this? But the Buddha taught that true giving, dana, doesn't diminish us. In fact, it does the opposite. It frees us. It's the loosening of the grip, the softening of the ego, the small but powerful moment when we say, I don't need to possess this in order to be whole. Letting go doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes, it means staying present without trying to control. It means offering love without demanding love back. It means giving help without needing to be thanked. And that's hard, because a part of us, conditioned by fear and shaped by a world of scarcity, wants reassurance. It wants proof that we're valuable, that we matter, that our efforts will be remembered. But real freedom begins when we no longer need that proof. Modern science backs this up. Studies in Neuroscience show that generous acts activate the brain's reward systems, not only for the receiver, but for the giver. The more we give mindfully, the more resilient, connected, and mentally healthy we become. Not because we're losing, but because we're opening. Giving isn't depletion, it's expansion. And yet, the mind resists. It tells us that if we let go, we'll be empty. That if we loosen our grip, we'll be left behind. But the truth is, we're already burdened by what we refuse to release. Our hands aren't free because they're full of resentment, of old stories, of control disguised as care. To give from a place of clarity is to unclench those fists. To say, I can love and still let go. I can offer and still be whole. Giving without losing isn't a contradiction. It's a realization that the more open we are, the more whole we become. That in releasing what we never truly owned, we return to something deeper than possession, something softer than control. We return to presence, to enoughness, to peace. One breath, one moment. How to see change as it happens. Take a breath, not the kind you take while rushing to your next appointment, or scrolling through your phone, or waiting for someone to respond. Take the kind of breath that feels like a return, a homecoming. Feel the air enter, feel it leave. That's it. Nothing dramatic, nothing mystical, just this moment, rising, passing. This breath, beginning, ending. And yet, within this single breath, the entire truth of impermanence is revealed. No breath stays, no moment lasts. And yet we live as if they should. We build routines, chase goals, hold grudges, and cling to people, all while quietly believing that what we have right now will remain exactly as it is. But the breath doesn't lie. It comes, it goes. It reminds us, gently but persistently, that everything is always in motion. The Buddha taught impermanence not to frighten us, but to awaken us. He understood that our suffering doesn't come from change itself, but from our resistance to it. We want things to stay comfortable, predictable, known. But life doesn't ask for our permission to shift. People grow apart. Bodies age. Seasons turn. Success fades. Even pain, no matter how heavy, eventually softens. And when we learn to witness this with clarity instead of clinging, something opens. We begin to live not in fear of change, but in rhythm with it. Modern neuroscience now supports what ancient practice has long known. The more aware we are of the present moment, the less reactive we become. We don't have to fix everything. We don't have to force outcomes. We just have to notice, really notice, what's happening right now. That noticing becomes a kind of liberation. It loosens the grip of anxiety. It softens the edges of control. And in that space, even pain becomes manageable. Even joy becomes more vibrant. To see change as it happens doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. It means becoming honest. It means looking at a flower and knowing it won't last, and loving it more, not less, because of that. It means holding someone's hand and knowing one day we'll have to let go, but doing it anyway, fully, with our whole heart. That's not detachment. That's presence. That's life. And it all begins with one breath, one moment, again and again, until we stop trying to capture time and simply begin to live inside it. The bird that carried nothing, living lightly in a heavy world. Some mornings, just before sunrise, a bird cuts across the sky, silent, effortless, carrying nothing. No suitcase, no past, no story to prove. It moves not because it owns the sky, but because it belongs to no one. It builds a nest, then leaves it, finds food, then forgets it. Nothing is hoarded, nothing is clung to. And yet, in its brief, weightless flight, there is freedom that many of us, grounded by our own attachments, may never feel. We, on the other hand, live heavy. We carry what people said to us years ago. We hold on to things that no longer work, identities that no longer fit, and expectations that were never truly ours. We accumulate possessions and pain, titles and timelines, until our lives feel so full they begin to close in on us. We call it being responsible, being successful, being someone. But what we're often doing is clinging so tightly that there's no room left to breathe. The Buddha never told us to reject the world, but he did invite us to hold it lightly, to love without possession, to walk without dragging the past, to live without defining ourselves by what we own, what we've lost, or what we fear we'll lose. He pointed us toward a way of being that is rooted in presence, not in grasping, but in grace. To live lightly doesn't mean we don't care. It means we don't carry more than we need to. It means we can hold grief without drowning in it, joy without trying to keep it forever, love without trying to trap it in our hands. It means we can give without depletion, receive without guilt, and let go without collapse. It's not detachment, it's wisdom, a deep understanding that nothing truly belongs to us, and so everything becomes a gift. In a world that tells us to collect, defend, and define, choosing to live lightly is a radical act. It's the decision to move like that. Bird across the sky, not in escape, but in trust. Trust that you are enough without the weight. That freedom isn't found in holding on, but in letting go. And maybe, just maybe, the less we carry, the more we can actually fly. This is not mine, a practice that frees the mind. Pick up your phone. Look at it. Now, quietly say to yourself, "This is not mine." Feel the shift, not in the object, but in your mind. Something softens, something loosens. The grip begins to open. This is the heart of a practice the Buddha offered not as a philosophy to study, but as a truth to live. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not who I am. At first glance, the words feel strange, even harsh. We're taught from childhood to claim, to identify, to attach. My toy, my room, my thoughts, my life. Ownership is how we define ourselves. But this practice gently undoes that habit, not through force, but through clear seeing. You watch your thoughts and realize you didn't choose them. They arise on their own, driven by memories, impressions, and mood. You feel anger and say, "This is not mine," not to deny it, but to recognize its passing nature. You feel sadness, and instead of drowning in it, you whisper, "This is not me," not to escape it, but to stop fusing with it. Slowly, the mind starts to observe instead of absorb. It watches instead of reacts. And that watching is the beginning of freedom. This practice is not cold detachment. It's warm awareness. It teaches us not to reject our experience, but to hold it lightly. To know that our job title is not our identity. That our emotions are not permanent truths. That even the body, with all its beauty and pain, is something we are borrowing for a little while. Science now echoes what this ancient insight has shown for centuries. Mindfulness meditation, when practiced consistently, reduces over-identification with thoughts and emotions. It rewires the brain to respond instead of react. It builds space between stimulus and story. And in that space, suffering begins to dissolve. The beauty of this practice is in its simplicity. At any moment, you can pause and remember, "This is not mine." Not to become passive, but to become clear. Not to let go of responsibility, but to let go of illusion. It's not an escape from life, it's a deeper entrance into it. Because when we stop clinging, we can finally show up with more presence, more kindness, more peace. You don't have to give up everything to be free. You just have to stop pretending it all belongs to you. The beauty of empty hands. Letting go is not a loss, but a gift. There's something quietly beautiful about empty hands. They're not clinging, not defending, not grasping for control. They're open, they're free, they're ready to receive, to give, to rest. In a world that constantly tells us to accumulate more success, more stuff, more certainty, it's easy to believe that letting go is some kind of failure. But the truth is, letting go is not about losing. It's about making space. Space for peace. Space for presence. Space for life to move again. We live most of our lives holding tightly to people, identities, emotions, plans. We carry the weight of expectations, old stories, and silent fears. And yet, none of it ever really belonged to us. The relationships, the roles, the victories, the pain, all of it is passing. All of it is borrowed. And when we try to make it permanent, we suffer. Not because life is cruel, but because we misunderstood its nature. The Buddha never asked us to give up joy. He asked us to stop clinging to it. He never said not to love. He showed us how to love without chains. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring. It means we stop trying to control what we were never meant to own. And in that surrender, we discover a deeper kind of strength. The ability to be fully here, fully alive, without needing to hold anything too tightly. In modern psychology, this is echoed in the idea of psychological flexibility, the ability to move with life rather than resist it. Studies show that those who can release attachment to fixed identities and outcomes are more resilient, more at peace, and more capable of deep connection. It's not detachment, it's presence without possession. So maybe the question was never, how do I hold on? Maybe the real question is, what becomes possible when I let go? And the answer is everything. Because with empty hands, we can finally touch the world as it is, not through fear, but through freedom. This is the quiet miracle of the path the Buddha walked. Not escape, not denial, but awakening. Not in some distant future, but right here, in this very moment, when we finally stop grasping and start breathing. When we open our hands, we don't lose. We return. We come home to the only thing we ever truly had. This breath, this moment, this freedom. The freedom of letting go. You never needed to hold on. All along, we thought freedom was something we had to earn. That peace was waiting for us on the other side of achievement, control, or certainty. So we held on tight to our possessions, to our roles, to our pain. We believed that if we gripped hard enough, we could make life stay still, make love stay close, make time slow down. But it never worked. Things still changed, people still left, time still moved. And in our attempt to control what could never be controlled, we missed the quiet truth that was always there. We were never meant to hold on in the first place. Everything we've explored in this journey, from the body we didn't choose to the thoughts that arise without our permission, from the stories we tell ourselves to the illusion of ownership, has pointed us to one liberating truth. Nothing was ever truly ours. And that's not a reason to fear. It's an invitation to finally relax, to breathe, to stop clinging and start living. Because when nothing belongs to you, you don't have to protect it, fear losing it, or carry it forever. The Buddha didn't ask us to abandon life. He asked us to stop grasping at it. He saw that the source of suffering wasn't the world, but the way we relate to it. Our attachments, our fixed identities, our belief that we must always have or be something in order to feel whole. But freedom doesn't come from holding on. It comes from remembering that who you are is not what you cling to. It's the awareness that can let go. This wasn't a lesson about loss. It was a journey home, to the part of you that was never broken, never missing, never dependent on anything outside of yourself. Every chapter we explored was a step toward remembering what you already knew deep down. You are not what you own. You are not what you hold. You are what remains when you open your hands and release. And this path doesn't end here. The freedom of letting go isn't a single moment. It's a way of living, a quiet, daily practice, a way of meeting life with trust instead of tension, with presence instead of possession. So let this be your invitation, not just to think differently, but to live more lightly, more clearly, more freely. If something in this message helped you breathe a little easier or see yourself a little more clearly, consider sharing it with someone else who might need it too. Subscribe if you'd like to keep walking this path with us. And if your heart is asking for more, we've created other videos, gentle companions for this journey, waiting patiently, like a quiet friend, for when you're ready to return. You never needed to hold on. You only needed to come back, to the stillness, to the breath, to the freedom that was always yours.